King, comfort of the Spirit, truth, giver, president, full of all things, treasure of blessings, and giver of life. Come and abide us and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O God. Okay. So, I think last time we talked a lot about the person of wisdom. We read through some of the texts of wisdom in the Old Testament, and how there's a correspondence, and actually I would say more than a correspondence, but the appearance of this personification of wisdom in the text. I think it's valuable to understand that the writer of Revelation is using images from the mythology that was prevalent at the time, and so that's one of the things that we're going to go into today. And when I say mythology, I'm not talking about fake stories and things like that, and I'm not talking about mythology is the use of images to convey a message, and it has personifications, it has all these kinds of things, but it's not necessarily to be taken literally. For example, wisdom is personified in the Old Testament. Apparently, there was a multi-person Godhead in the first temple, and one of those was sevenfold. But also you had the image of the figure of wisdom, who is also known as the Mother of the Lord, who is known as the Queen of Heaven, and who is also known as the Holy Spirit, and who is the Mother of Yahweh. And who was with God when He created the world. And you can read all about it in the Wisdom of Solomon. You can read all about it in Proverbs. You can read, it's referred to throughout the Old Testament. Does that mean that we believe in a mother goddess who is all of these things and a distinct female deity? No, it doesn't. But there is this, but what they were, I think what we could say they were doing is they were using these images, these traditional images from the culture to express a reality which is otherwise not expressible in empirical language. And we have an obsession in our culture with empirical language. Empirical history, empirical, that the scriptures have to be empirically true. That it's simply a history book, and that every event happened just as it's described, and everything was exactly as it's described, and that there's no room for the use of, there's some kind of reality to some of the images that are described. Well, I think when we start looking at the next few chapters of the book of Revelation, we'll see that maybe that's not exactly the case. Maybe they're using all sorts of symbology and all sorts of mythological language from the culture to convey a reality which otherwise they can't convey. Now, some of this mythological language is contained in the scriptures, or it's referred to in the scriptures. Hello. The sources of that mythological language are very ancient. You know, from the first temple, the era of the first temple, from the era of the patriarchs, way back. And, you know, maybe to the era of Noah. So, for example, talks about a universal flood. Okay, maybe, you know, one of the, there were undoubtedly universal floods at the end of the Ice Age. And at that time, vast lakes built up in what would be inland lakes, like the whole Great Basin, from Nevada to Colorado, and from, you know, all the way up to Washington, and who knows, maybe into Canada, was one vast inland sea. And it broke through eventually. That's what the Columbia Gorge is. It's the result of that. And if that wasn't a massive flood, I don't know what is. And what happened? The sea level rose a couple hundred feet. You know, and this is empirical history. It's not, well, it's not empirical, it's geological history. I think probably the Colorado River Canyon was partly carved by that. That's why you get something like the Grand Canyon, which is, have you all been to the Grand Canyon?
Been close. I've never seen it though.
Well, it's pretty remarkable. You know, it's miles and miles across, and it's a mile deep, and it was all carved out by water. You know, that would take, a massive flood would do that. And that happened when the ice melted very quickly at the end of the last ice age. And that's, of course, a relative term. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly what the geology of the Middle East is, where these great basins of water built up. But undoubtedly, they flowed through the Middle East, you know, and there was a time when the Mediterranean was empty, and when the Black Sea was empty, and it was then filled. And they have, you know, evidently at Gibraltar, they have a kind of a geological record that the water broke through from the Atlantic at one time and just filled that whole basin. So there's all sorts of these things, but, you know, and who knows? Maybe this is a kind of cultural. Some of the flood is like a cultural memory of that. But thinking about the flood, it would not have been a peaceful event. It wouldn't have just been a little trickle of water. You don't get the Columbia Gorge or the Grand Canyon carved by a little trickle of water. You get, you know, these were massive floods. And, you know, anything, I know in California, the coastline moved in 20 miles. So if people were living along the coast, where they were living is under a couple hundred feet of water now. And that wasn't that long ago. That was 10,000 years ago. So, but when it comes to the language of mythology, nobody has a real grasp on historical time. In the first place, they weren't interested. They didn't care. It didn't matter. Their whole culture was not. You know, they weren't interested in kind of you know, blow by blow by blow by blow history, and then, you know, which events triggered each other, because everything came from God, or the gods, and so it was you know, and this is what the history of the scriptures is. It's, you know, it's God's activity among human beings, and especially in the mythological chapters, especially of Genesis, which is the first 12 chapters. You can't. It does absolute violence to the text to try and understand it literally. So. Now, there would be some who would argue with me and say I'm unorthodox. Well, I will accept that accusation, and I will say the same thing to them. So, but it's...
But does it has to do with Orthodoxy?
Pardon?
Why would it be not Orthodox?
It's a phrase on perspective. It's not directed towards the Orthodox Church.
Well, it would be unorthodox because I'm not accepting what certain of the fathers wrote, where they wrote as if they were accepting a 7-day creation according to a literal interpretation of Genesis.
Can you speak more about why it would do violence to the text?
In the first place,
and what that means.
That's not what the text was written for. The text is a liturgical book. It's a liturgical hymn that was used possibly for when they set up the tabernacle in the wilderness. That text was sung as the tent was being put up, because it was a liturgical act. Just like when we erect a church, when we consecrate a church, it's a liturgical act. It's an act by carpenters, you know, usually, or stonemasons, but it's a liturgical act. And people were not interested in empirical history. That's not what it's about. It's a mythological history, and it's not a history. It's not in a sense. It's not human events. It's about divine events. It's about God's work with humanity. And while they do have a certain historical implication, we can't necessarily take what was written as mythology and transpose it into a contemporary textbook of empirical history. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, in short, I have no patience with fundamentalism. Okay, and there are Orthodox.
Heretic.
That's right. And there are Orthodox.
Sorry.
And there are Orthodox who are fervent fundamentalists, and God bless them.
Some of them are great Christians too, you know.
Some of them are. Yeah.
But your point about the geological history is that the converse is true also. Just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean that it's not true.
Right.
There are people that go the opposite way, these militant atheists.
Right.
If it's there, and then there's some archaeology that proves something, and they go ballistic.
Right.
And there was an event, like I believe there's some astronomers have been able to backtrack, and they can, I think at the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was, and I may be wrong about that, but there was some event
In the sky.
in the sky that,
Sure.
but I mean, so there's room for this. So it's complex.
It is complex, and so what we need to understand is that there are parts of the scriptures, parts of the Bible that are mythology, which doesn't mean that it's untrue. It's just a different style of writing. There are parts that are empirical history, and there are parts that are a combination of the two. So,
But geologists have found
Mm.
balls of sulfur around the area that they're finding deep enough to where the age is the right time.
yeah.
You can't rewrite history with geology.
No.
No, but geology can prove your history.
Right. Well, and that's partly geology and partly archaeology.
Archaeology.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know, because if they're finding those balls of sulfur in association with burned buildings, you know. But the story of Sodom and Gomorrah isn't exactly it's not in the mythological part of the scripture of Genesis.
Hmm.
You know, in a sense, history starts after Noah. You know, the historical part. And part of what I want to deal with today is precisely that part after Noah, because as we get into chapter 12 and chapter 13, it deals with images that are related to those stories. Now, part of that mythological material was in the book of Enoch. Part of it is Enoch is cited by, well, it's quoted in the Bible, you know, in the books both of the Old and New Testament. But it's also quoted by another book called the Book of Jubilees, which is another apocalyptic book. And it's referred to by many other contemporary first century authors, and from well before. So parts of the Book of Enoch go way back, and parts of it are probably later, and it's this great jumble, you know. And then you know, we don't exactly have a manuscript history. We've got quotations that are in older texts that we know about, and so we can figure the Book of Enoch's been around for a long time. And it, like the Ascension of Moses, like the Book of Jubilees and others, are essentially expanded versions of Genesis, of the Genesis myth. Part of what is dealt with in 12 and 13 is exactly a lot of the symbolism, a lot of the images are taken out of there. Now there's another aspect of what's going on, and you have well, I hate to use this terminology, but you have you know, positive images and then you have their opposite. Like you have the Christ and you have the Antichrist. But you have that opposition in a number of different things. So, and just in the text itself. Remember we talked about the woman clothed with the sun in beginning of chapter 12. Well, her opposite is the harlot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what the woman clothed in the sun, where those images are drawn from, is the wisdom literature, and she is among other things, an image of wisdom. She's also an image of Mary, you know, and so you have all the typology surrounding her. Then you have her opposite. One of the you know, between British English and American English, there are some subtle differences. One of those differences is the use of the term antitype. And in American English, the term antitype is Greek. But in British English, at least using people like Margaret Barker and others, it's Latin. And so the senses are different. In Greek, the prefix anti means instead of. In Latin, it means against. So you read along in Margaret Barker's commentary, and she's talking about this is the antitype of this, and this is the antitype of that, and it's like, wait a second, that does not make sense if you're using the Greek meaning. If you use the Latin meaning, it makes perfect sense. So you have to know, you have to kind of figure out what's going on with the text and where it's coming from and where the author is coming from. So, for example, the woman clothed with the sun and the harlot are antitypes of one another in the Latin sense, right? They're in opposition. And then these various beasts and things that you find in the next few chapters are antitypes of, and it's interesting what they're antitypes of. And so there's this whole, and then you have the opposition, but then you also have this whole the whole typological, the Greek typological thing going on, because it's drawing from all these types in the Old Testament, in the imagery. Does it make sense? So, the woman clothed with the sun, and she's the type of wisdom, she's the type of the Queen of Heaven, she's the type of the Mother of God, she's the type of the Holy Spirit, she's the type of Ashtoreth, she's the type of and what are those types? The menorah, you know, and the showbread, and all of these other things that are, you know, and so for example, and for us, what holds that together? Remember the hymn to the Mother of God in one of the great feasts? You are the ark, the staff, the table of the law, the golden censer, the throne of the king. Okay? Where the Mother of God is seen, is understood as the antitype, in the Greek sense, the fulfillment of all of these Old Testament types. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, the staff of Aaron, the tablets of the law, the censer, the showbread, and all of that stuff, those aren't exactly images of a woman, right? But through typology, because of typology, it's all interrelated. Because those were associated with her and with her cult. Now, I use the word cult. Everybody understands that, right? Cult means complex of religious beliefs and actions. It doesn't mean, you know, some strange guru.
It's a precursor to culture.
Yeah. What's that?
Precursor to culture? Or the
No, it means religion. You know, it means a complex of religious beliefs and activities. So you can say that there is a cult. When you refer to the cult of Russian Orthodoxy, what you're referring to is the temple, the chalices, the vestments, the services. That's the cult. There's a different cult in Roman Catholicism because their style of all of that stuff is different. It has nothing to do with how it's used in a just in common, you know, of some kind of an oppressive group. There's nothing at all to do with that.
Has the meaning of the word changed through history?
Well, the meaning has changed, but you know, the contemporary usage is probably a very late usage.
Diko, why do you think, I guess, the Apostle John used so much mythology? Was he just using images that were familiar to the people, or was he trying to somehow speak somewhat secretly for a reason, or was it just...
Yeah, he was using images, familiar to the people. So, if somebody says, "Oh, an angel appeared to me," what kind of an image would come to your mind?
I don't know.
But
In our culture, it would probably be some kind of vaguely feminine or asexual form in a long white robe with wings, and which actually is more in Western mythology is more like a fairy, right?
yeah.
You think of fairies as little, now, what we would call them demons, but but and then if you're a Byzantine, and somebody said the angel appeared to Mary, what kind of an image would you have in your mind?
The icon that you see.
What's that?
On the icon you see the appearance of the angel. That's
Right, and in the
Yeah.
Byzantine icons, what is the appearance of an angel?
A male youth, right?
It's a soldier. is a soldier in battle armor.
They don't
You know?
show him as a soldier.
And so, what's that?
They don't show him as a soldier.
Well, the old Byzantine icons do.
Yes, do.
The Westernized icons show them as,
Women.
as these female or asexual figures. And so, it would be really incorrect to say, politically incorrect to say what I'm thinking. But could you imagine? Could you imagine that kind of an image being the general of the angelic hosts? It's like really funny. Totally politically incorrect. But you look at the ancient Byzantine and Russian images of Michael and Gabriel and all. They've got big muscles and they're dressed in battle armor,
They're soldiers.
and they're definitely strong masculine figures. So, what other cherub? What do you think? What do we think of in our American mythology of the cherub?
A little fat baby.
A fat little baby with wings, right? Well, okay. Those are actually Roman deities. It has nothing at all to do with the cherubim, or the cherubic throne, which are more like sphinxes with huge wings, or the later Orthodox understanding of these six-winged beings with a face in the center of these wings and maybe a couple of feet sticking out, which look kind of funny because they usually have really skinny legs.
Legs if you had 6 wings.
Yeah, why? But we have, this is only an example, and we've forgotten our mythologies of our cultures.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of a hammer, do you think of Thor? No. But 300 years ago, you saw a big hammer, you would immediately associate it with Thor's hammer. And that whole mythology, and whoever thinks of Thursday as Thor's day, which is what it is, Donnerstag is. We're out of touch with the historical foundations of our culture. which lie, and there are multiple ones because our culture is this incredible mix. Now, if you had Mexican Americans sitting in this room, which I don't think we do right now, you'd be adding all of the Aztec deities and all of that mythology, you know. And so what do we have here? We've got German, we've got Celtic, we've got, you know, Old Roman, we've got Old Greek, we've got, you know, all of these, and to some degree or another, these mythologies are still underlie our culture, even though our culture has been Christian for 1,200 years, 1,400 years, as Western, as North Europeans. Of course, then you've got the ancient cultures, you know. So Revelation, you know, is 1st century. It's drawing on material. It's maybe 1,000 years older, maybe 2,000 years older, maybe 5,000 years older. And there's this, and the historical continuity of the cultures comes through the mythologies. That's part of how the cultures are transmitted over the course of not only of the generations and the centuries, but of the millennia. And so they're familiar images that people understand, and that doesn't mean that that's their current religion, but people know or knew the stories. So,
the antitype of the beast is what?
we'll get to that. So, let's start in chapter 12 again. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. It's the EU, right? Yeah.
Oh, so 1,000 years from now, someone may think that that's what that refers to.
Yeah, if they're culturally illiterate, but like we are. Then being with child, she cried out in labor, and in pain gave birth. So we have that image in our culture, and on one hand, you've got one version of it is Our Lady of Guadalupe, right?
Yeah, I was going to actually mention that.
Yeah, but you also have that image in West pre-contact or pre-1492 European culture as well, because it's in the scriptures, and people would paint that, and so there's meaning to every word here in this image. She's a sign. She's clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Okay, that, I mean, the cosmic lady, right? Interesting. Well, what is that? Well, we'll get to that. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain gave birth. Labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Okay. This is very complex stuff. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So that the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren who accused them before our God day and night has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having the great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time." So far, we have the dragon with seven. We've got the woman clothed with the sun. We've got the dragon with 7 heads and 7 crowns, and 7 heads and 10 horns, and crowns on his heads. Then the child of the woman, and she flees to the wilderness. Okay, so it's pretty clear. Okay, you've got this image of the pregnant woman. Then this dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns. What could that be?
Be you.
Could be the Roman Empire. How about, what was that? How about look at Revelations chapter 5. Verse 6. "And I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he came and took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne." Okay. He's got 7 horns instead of, whereas the beast has 10 horns. He's got, it doesn't say how many heads he has. But 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God. Clearly there's some kind of analogy going on between the two. And the number 7 is very important. And it's used throughout. 7 signifies completeness. There's a whole numerology in Hebrew writing, and so 7 is part of it. Let's look back. chapter 1, verse 12. Then I turned to see the voices that spoke with me, and having turned I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the 7 lampstands one like the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the feet and girded about the chest with a golden band. His head and hair were white like wool and white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass as if refined in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. He had in his right hand 7 stars. Out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in strength. Okay, where did we see this image before? Daniel, Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Ancient of Days. So to identify in chapter 12, at least one of the people that's being talked about is that this is the enemy of the child, the dragon, is the antitype in that Latin sense of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
The antitype. Now, it says, the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. Okay. Who is who in the scriptures was ready to destroy the Christ?
Herod.
Herod.
Mm.
So this dragon, this beast, it may be Rome, the 7 hills, the 7. It may be Herod with his crowns. And it says, verse 5, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Now, it would be interesting to know where rod of iron comes from.
I think it might be in Psalm 2.
What's that?
Psalm
I
2.
remember that in Psalm 2 it talks about something to do with that. Psalm 2:9.
Psalm 2:9.
Want to read it?
Yeah, I think it's I think God's speaking, and he says, "As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel."
Mm-hmm. So, it's used several times actually. Look at Revelations 2:27. Okay. Okay, this is the letter to Thyatira, and it's quoting that verse from the Psalms.
It is. Yep.
But hold fast what you have till I come, and he who overcomes and keep my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron, and they shall be dashed to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now look at Revelations 19:15. Well, let's look at that whole paragraph. Now I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, on his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him out on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, and with it he should strike the nations. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. It sounds like a Confederate war hymn, right? Or the, mine eyes have seen the glory. In other words, there's very definite identification of the child with Christ. There is, by the way, a very excellent little computer program called Logos. If you get the full version, it's like $600. But there's also a mobile version which has multiple versions of the scriptures, as well as a search, and so you can plug in words. It's better than a concordance, and you can search all different versions and in all multiple languages and all that kind of stuff. So
it's more complicated in one language.
it's very complicated.
What I found here, it says, if God just needed people to wield iron rods, he would have no need of his saints. There is no shortage of thugs and bullies, people accustomed to dominating and terrorizing others who would qualify for that job. What he needs are those who have spent their lives developing the character of Jesus Christ, those who can be trusted to exercise great power with love and mercy, as well as firmness and justice. And then it adds, the rod of iron will come with a warning label, used only as directed by the Holy Spirit. So,
Who wrote that?
well, it's saying that
That's politically correct.
Yeah, it is.
But there's some truth to what he wrote.
Well, yeah, it is, but but it's definitely like, the image. One of the things that the modern culture, the feminized culture, can't stand is the idea of Christ the warrior.
Yeah.
And one of the things we never see almost is the icon of Christ the warrior. Now, in Decini,
I've seen one in Kosovo.
it's in Kosovo, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
I've seen it. He has a big sword.
It's huge, right?
Yeah. I had liturgy. I stood in front of it every day. That's why I like that seat.
Right. There's this huge image of Christ the warrior with a sword.
wow.
Yeah.
It's supposed to
And
cut your
it's-
sins out.
And it's this eschatological image of Christ.
I have a picture of it somewhere. Let me go get it.
well, even in our time, one goes back only 100 years or so, it was greater authority. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
invested even in a teacher in a school.
Right.
I mean, or in parents or fathers, or
Mm-hmm.
but so one can only imagine thousands of years ago
Yeah.
the idea that of exercising authority wasn't considered such a evil or counterproductive
Right.
concept.
Well, here again, what is our image of Christ? We have sweet Jesus playing with the baby lambs, or we have Jesus who sacrifices the lambs
Where makes
as
the
the high priest.
drives the people out of the temples with
Right.
whips and cords.
Yeah, we've got this cultural image, which over the past 150 years, has turned into this kind of namby-pamby, feminized Fluff, yeah. Or Jesus as a strong male.
We have a picture of Jesus, but what about God? When you say God, what do you see?
Jesus is the picture of it. Jesus is the image of God. If you want the image of the Father, what do you see? Nothing. He's ineffable, inconceivable, invisible, incomprehensible, ever existing, and eternally the same. So we can't have any picture of any image of God is inadequate. That's why in iconography, even though you see it all over the place,
Like
it's forbidden.
Yeah.
It's forbidden.
What do you see?
The Trinity. Usually the picture of the old man, the kid, and the bird.
Iconography in Russian churches, you can see God sitting on the clouds.
And Greek churches, it's
like
very bad.
Oh man.
And it's technically a heretical icon.
Really?
It's
Yeah.
there.
It's not quite as heretical as the image of God with three faces.
Really?
Yeah,
Like
that's a
I've never seen
modalist
that.
idea. It's also a Hindu
Really?
icon, yeah.
Wow.
But that was, I don't know that it was ever used in the Christian tradition. Anyway, so, but, so, let's see, where are we? She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron.
He's
In other
sending
words,
himself.
A strong ruler. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. What is that referring to?
The ascension.
Yeah, the ascension and Christ sitting at the right hand of the Father,
Mm-hmm.
which is back in chapter 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about that. So it kind of hits the high points of who Jesus is, that his birth, while on one hand is from an earthly mother, on the other hand there's a kind of cosmic mother. And so who is the woman clothed with the sun?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now,
Who are those angels?
well, this is where we get into some of the parallel literature, and this is quite interesting. So this is from the book of Jubilees.
Would you mind saying what the...
Book of Jubilees, they don't know when it was written, but it's one of these expanded versions of Genesis. One of the things about the temple theology is that when a priest was ordained, especially a high priest or the king, while they had the royal cult, it would be in the Holy of Holies, and he would be given to know he would be given the vision of all of how God created the universe. And so this vision of the meaning of creation is found in a lot of the literature coming from, a lot of the priestly literature. So, for example, that's part of what Genesis is. It's probably also my guess is that it's probably also the hymnography that was sung when the high priest or the king, because they were the same person very often, was consecrated. He was given the full knowledge of the understanding of the creation. And these other versions are basically expansions on that, and maybe they were other versions used at various times. I don't. Who knows? Nobody knows. You're dealing with texts, you know, parts of which are maybe 3,000 years old. So this is the Book of Jubilees. You know what the Jubilees were, right? It's every
50.
Yeah, every 50 years there was a Jubilee year, and all the slaves were freed, all debts were forgiven. That is, all Hebrew slaves were freed, not non-Hebrew slaves. All debts were forgiven, and everybody could repossess their own land if it had been taken from them for some reason. And so there was it was very bad for the economy, so they stopped doing it. but there was a whole, and which is part of their rebellion against God. They stopped doing the Jubilees.
And so does this Book of Jubilees refer to multiple Jubilees?
Yes, because and it's, I think from this book that it talks about that it's at the end of the 10th Jubilee that the Messiah comes and does the cosmic atonement for the whole creation. And the end of the 10th Jubilee was 33 AD. Okay, so you have.
How do you calculate that?
That's the scholars calculated that.
Huh.
So it would have been from 533 or something, or no, 570.
667.
No, 500 years would be 467, wouldn't it?
Yeah, 467.
Yeah, 467.
Yeah, and so and what was 467? It was probably about the time that the temple was reconsecrated. The second temple was reconsecrated or built. That's my guess. I don't know exactly, but it starts back, and part of the numbering of the Jubilees is in the book of Daniel. So listen to this. When human, and this is okay, in the 25th Jubilee, Noah took a wife, and her name was Emzara, the daughter of Rachael, the daughter of his father's brother. This was in the first year of the 5th week. In the 3rd year of it, she bore him Shem. In the 5th year of it, she bore him Ham. And the 5th year, in the 6th week, she bore him Japheth. When humans began to increase on the earth, and daughters were born to them, on a certain year of this Jubilee, the angels of God saw that they were beautiful to look at, and they took for themselves any woman they chose. The women bore progeny to them, and they were Nephilim, in other words, giants, or watchers. Lawlessness increased on the earth, and all living things went corrupt. Humans, cattle, animals, birds, and everything that walks on the earth. They went corrupt in every way and started eating each other. Lawlessness increased on the earth. People's thoughts were always evil, and this kept happening. God looked at the earth, and it was corrupt. Every living thing had gone corrupt. Everything on earth had done all kinds of evil as far as God was concerned. God said that he would destroy humans and all living things on the face of the earth, which he had created. But Noah found favor in the Lord's eyes. God was furious with the angels he had sent to the earth. This is a contemporary translation, obviously. He was exceedingly angry. He gave the order to strip them completely of their authority. He told us to bind them in the depths of the earth, so they are bound there in the middle of the earth and are kept separate. God also commanded that their offspring were to be put to the sword and be removed from under heaven. God said, "My spirit will not always stay with humans, as they are also flesh and blood, and they will live to the age of 120 years. God sent his sword among them, so that each would slay their neighbor. They kept killing each other until they all fell by the sword and were wiped off the face of the earth. Their fathers were witnesses to this. After this happened, their fathers were bound in the depths of the earth until the day of the great condemnation, when judgment will be executed on all those who have done corrupt things in the Lord's sight." Let's see, skipping a little bit. The Lord said that he would destroy everything which was on the earth, humans, cattle, beasts, and fowls of the air, and everything that moves on the earth. The Lord commanded Noah to make an ark so that he could save himself from the floodwaters. Noah made the ark exactly as the Lord told him. This was in the 27th Jubilee of years, in the 5th week, in the 5th year, on the new moon of the 1st month. Noah entered the ark in the 6th year of it, in the 2nd month, on the new moon of the 2nd month, until the 16th. Noah entered the ark, and the Lord opened 7 floodgates of heaven, and opened the mouths of the fountains of the great deep, and so forth. Now, that's the Book of Jubilees. However, a little earlier in that passage, okay. And this is, well, in the 7th week of the 12th Jubilee, he took a wife. Who took a wife? Whoever it was. Her name was Edna, the daughter of Daniel, the daughter of his father's brother. In the 6th year, in this week, she bore him a son. He called him Methuselah. Furthermore, he was with the angels of God these 6 jubilees of years, and they showed him everything which is on earth and in the heavens. The rule of the sun, he wrote everything down. He testified about the watchers who had sinned with human women. The watchers had begun to have sex with the human women, and so were defiled. Enoch testified against them all. So, what does Enoch say? This is chapter 6. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heavens, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear you will not indeed agree to this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. And then swore they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were all in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon, because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders. Semiazaz, their leader, Arakiba, Ramiel, Tokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Donal, Ezekiel, Verakiel, Asiel, Armoros, Batarel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapiel. These sound like good names to Tantra monks with. Maybe not.
No.
And all the others, together with them, took unto themselves wives. These are angels, right? They took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, whatever that is, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them, and devoured mankind, and they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. And the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. And Azazel, which is what did they call him earlier? It's the same. It's understood to be the same. Semjaza is Azazel. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cuttings, Armoros the resolving of enchantments, Barachiel taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arachiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. And men perished, and they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. Then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven, and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. And they said to one another, the earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their crying up to the gate of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make their suit, saying, bring our cause before the Most High. And they said to the Lord our God, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, and God of the ages, throne of thy glory, the throne of thy glory standeth unto all generations of the ages. And thy name holy and glorious and blessed unto all the ages. Thou hast made all things, and power over all things hast thou, and all things are naked and open in thy sight. And thou seest all things, and nothing can hide itself from thee. Thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And Semjaza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates, and they have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sin. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness. And now behold, the souls of those who have died are crying and making their suit to the gates of heaven. And their lamentations have ascended and cannot cease, because of the lawless deeds which are wrought on the earth. And thou knowest all things, therefore they come to pass. And thou seest these things, and thou dost suffer them. And thou dost not say to us what we are to do to them in regard to these.
What do you make of this type of literature?
This is very ancient mythology underlying the Bible.
What is it?
This is the book of Enoch.
Yeah.
Remember, this book is in the canon of Scripture of the Ethiopian Church.
Mm.
In fact, this is a translation of the Ethiopian text of Enoch. But it permeates. Enoch permeates a lot of the literature of the 1st century BC and 1st century AD.
Do they have any idea when it was written? Or?
No. Okay, I'll read a little bit more in chapter 10 and then skip over. Then said the Most High, the Holy and Great One, spake and sent Uriel to the son of Lamech, and said to him, go to Noah and tell him in my name, hide thyself, and reveal to him the end that is approaching, that the whole earth will be destroyed. And a deluge is about to come upon the whole earth, and will destroy all that is on it. And now instruct him that he may escape, and his seed may be preserved for all the generations of the world. And again the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place him upon rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face, that he may not see light. And on the day of great judgment he shall be cast into the fire, and so forth. And the Lord said to Michael, go bind Semjaza and his associates, who who have united themselves with women so as to have defiled themselves, with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment in the consummation. So, interesting, huh?
This is providing detail as to the reasons why
Yep.
the flood had to come to destroy what was evil and preserve what was good. They were
Right.
wicked people with a
Mhm.
lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And they may have had some sort of help from divine beings who were producing
Angels.
offspring that had powers
Right.
that gave them an unfair advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, think about the Day of Atonement. There were 2 goats. One for the Lord. What was the other one?
One for Azazel.
For Azazel.
Hmm.
Or one
That's
who
right,
was
it's
the
called-
Lord,
it's called this.
and one who was Azazel.
Right.
They wanted to
You know
appease
what,
him.
what's the definition of Azazel?
It's a name.
Okay. But usually a
Is
name
it
will
an
mean something.
antitype?
I don't know. I think it gave it here.
Was Azazel an evil god
I
or
think it's a,
It's a fallen angel.
it's an
a
error.
fallen angel?
It also talks about the
But can you explain this about the gift for God and the gift for Azazel? What was that?
Well, that was, well, it wasn't a gift for God and a gift for Azazel. It was the sacrifice on the Day of Atonement, the greatest sacrifice offered in the temple, where there was one goat which bore the name of the Lord, and another goat that bore the name Azazel,
Oh,
the scapegoat,
oh.
which was then sent off into the desert and killed, probably. Whereas the goat for the Lord, or of the Lord, was taken, it was sacrificed, and its blood was taken into the Holy of Holies and used to sanctify everything, and then it was eaten by the priests.
Wasn't there a sense too that all the sins of the people as a collectivity, as a community,
sent-
were put on
We're laid on
Azazel.
Azazel.
onto Azazel? And,
Sent to the desert.
yeah,
That's a good idea.
That's
they
their
would be
scapegoat.
transferred and go off to.
Okay, so we have a typology here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the typology?
Scapegoat.
Well,
Taking
you
upon the
got-
sins of the
Taking
world.
since
Take away the sins of the world, and so who is the goat for the Lord?
Oh, the goat for the Lord would be Christ.
Yeah. And who's the goat? Who's the goat Azazel?
The beast. The Antichrist.
Judas.
Oh, Judas.
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
beast, the beast.
So, and you're dealing with a very, and my guess now, for meat to be killed in a kosher manner, what was done?
The
Yeah,
blade and
before a
knife, it
certain
has to
time.
be one, to minimize the suffering of the animal, it has to be very quick and fast,
Slit the throats.
slit very fast,
Mhm.
and then all the blood has to be drained out. No blood can remain in any meat and be consumed.
Right. And so,
Even the blood of an animal, it's life, it's
Right.
not to be.
well, it was the blood of animals that was offered in sacrifice. But how did Judas die?
Hung himself.
He hung himself.
No blood.
No blood. In other words, he was strangled. And my guess is that the goat of Azazel was probably also strangled because it was not eaten.
I think the goat is not a kosher animal.
Of course, it's a kosher animal.
Is it the goat?
Oh yeah.
The horse is not. But
No, the goat has any animal with cloven hooves is kosher. Horse doesn't have cloven hooves.
right. The goat is kosher.
Right.
Oh man, okay.
So the reason going through all of this material is that this is all background for these images that are used in chapter 12. So, war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. What's he talking about? He's talking about Satan, right? And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And what did we just read about? The angels being bound until the day of judgment. Okay, then we have, now I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before God day and night, who has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in the woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Accuser is another title for Satan. Devil comes from diabolos, which means the divider. Satan means, I think the Hebrew of Satan means the accuser.
Is the word slander in there somewhere? Slanderer?
Probably implied. Now the dragon, verse 13, now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth, like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Dragon and serpent are the same concept. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So,
but the serpent saved the woman. The dragon was not. The dragon was after her. The serpent or the dragon didn't save the woman. What about the water? Even it did save it. It did save her by because the dragon had fire on his bunker, so she was taken by the flow. That's why the serpent.
It's okay. Verse 15. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood.
Yes.
But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. In other words, he tried to get her, but he couldn't. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
So any indication what that flood would be?
Well, what is it's one of the floods, the waters. This is a very important image in early biblical mythology, because the idea of the waters is that it's the primordial chaos that God fashioned. He separated the firmament from the waters. The waters are the primordial chaos, and so he created the firmament in the midst of the waters. And the Hebrews imagined the world as like this great island, a floating island, it must have been like the congressman who thought that if we put too many ships on Guam, that it would tip over. Yeah, it's really. Remember that? It's really funny. Idiot, but.
Baltimore.
But the world was this floating island in the midst of the primordial chaos, and there was water beneath it. So when the earth opened its mouth, as it were, it opened up so that the water would go down. And remember, in the flood, it talks about not just the rain, but that the fountains of the earth spewed forth water. In other words, the waters of the primordial chaos came and engulfed the earth.
There is no life without water.
That's true.
Okay. A lot to it.
There's a lot to this.
Because they prayed also that the heavens would open up and that there would be rain for the crops, or there would be no food.
Mm-hmm.
If they displeased God and turned away from His commandments, He would shut up the heavens,
Right.
And there would be no rain.
Right.
People couldn't eat.
Right. But the water falling from the sky is good. It's the primordial. That's the waters of the sea, of the rivers, and of the floods that are the dangers.
So in the transition away from
water. The good one and the bad one.
Yeah. In a sense.
Okay.
So in the transition away from believing that these forces of nature were gods and had personalities, some of this got transferred when they came to believe in the one God or the primary. That some of these intentionalities and purposes were, these things were purposeful on His part to.
But they also had angels attached to them, which are remnants of the old, the old religion. Just like in the back in Deuteronomy, the hymn of Moses, and it says that the nations were created according to the number of. Now the original text was the sons of God, or the number of the gods. And then it became the sons of God. And then it became the angels. And I don't know what the current Masoretic text says. I think it got rid of the angels.
How did you see these changes? What was that?
It's just looking at the different kinds of manuscripts.
Huh. Wow. So the manuscripts actually did contain like a pagan substrata kind of thing going on?
Well, no. The manuscript. Well, I mean, of course there is. I mean, that's when they were written.
Right.
But there have been different versions over the course of centuries, and the Old Testament has been edited and changed significantly. So what we have now is the Old Testament, and is not. I mean, it was radically. The books that went into its composition were radically different in 600 BC. I mean, it's nice and pious to say that Moses wrote the Old Testament, and and we have it as it was, but that's not. This is where empirical history kind of invades, because historically it's actually in the text that this happened. Not the other. If you're looking for a book that was dictated by God, go be a Muslim.
Yeah.
Or a Mormon.
Which guy?
With the Mormons, that's a good question.
Yeah.
So.
So, Deacon, what was that example you gave of the changing of the words? What was that from?
Well, it's just earlier versions, different versions of the text found in different places. In Deuteronomy 32, it's the hymn of Moses.
I mean, about the sons of God and the,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, and because there was a mythology, part of the mythology that all these angels were called sons of God.
Right, I remember they even, like you talked about the Nephilim in the Book of Enoch, but it actually mentions them somewhere in the canonical text, and it talks about the sons of God coming to have.
Right.
So were these? Is that all these different things are drawing on the same sort of mythology?
It's all coming out of the same milieu. And that milieu, partly it was the cultural milieu of the Semitic tribes, of which the Hebrews were one. And then affected by all the think about it. And they were like in the intersection of all the empires, crossroads in the Middle East. So they were continually getting run over. They got run over by the Egyptians, and then by the Persians, and then by the Assyrians, and then by the Greeks, and then by the Romans, and so forth. So that and all of these cultures left remnants, in the culture.
So you're saying sons of God can refer to angels in that context?
In that particular text, yes. The earliest versions of that text we have say that the text said sons of God, or gods even. Because monotheism is late.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't there with Abraham and the patriarchs. It wasn't there with Moses. It's much later.
Even Moses, you don't think, had the view of the one God? Huh.
He had one supreme God.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the God of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't. But those were among other gods. And I mean, you even see that in the text of the Psalms, for example. Who is like thee among the gods, O Lord? It's you're not dealing with a monotheistic culture. Even the time of David and Solomon wasn't. It wasn't the kind of rigid monotheism that came in after with Josiah's reforms and the exile. And the return from the exile, with the creation of Judaism as a religion.
But would you say that even after those reforms, they continued to acknowledge, I don't know if I'm correct, they had their God. But they continued to acknowledge that the existence of other gods, not that they worshipped or followed them. So they really weren't monotheists even then, in the strict sense that there is no existence of other gods.
Well, I think at first they probably thought they existed. And then you have some of the prophetic texts. All of the gods of the pagans are demons, which is a quotation from somewhere in the Psalms, I think. And so it evolved. Now, there was a quip in something I was reading that I think is also important to state is that some of this theology and this milieu, it not only produced Christianity in the Book of Revelation, the unique Christian vision, but it also produced Gnosticism, where it contributed to the development of Gnosticism. And a lot of this material was taken by the Gnostics and interpreted in there, just like mainline Christian material was taken by the Gnostics and reinterpreted in their context. So Roman religion in the Roman Empire was this incredible multiplicity of ideas and philosophies and deities and concepts, and so but one of the things that fundamentally differentiates Christianity from all of that other stuff and Judaism is that it became historical. You know, this Judaism, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses. You know, and the covenant with Moses and so forth. And then, you know, that shared history, and then the development of Judaism, and then the Talmud, you know, and rabbinic Judaism, and that development. Of Christianity, you have the historic person, Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God. None of these other religions had an incarnation of God. They were all mythology. So, so you had all of these various kinds of systems, and you had, you know, these mythological deities and all of that kind of stuff. But there was nothing. There was no concrete historical incarnation of God. There was no Savior. There was no Christ. Whereas in Christianity, we have that. Now, Christianity also had multiple forms until finally, you know, over the course of centuries, it got sorted out. You know, and we have, and all of those other forms fell away, or were cast away, and we just have, we have the vision of Christ and the Trinity that was given, that was initially given, and was fought for by the fathers to maintain the integrity of that vision, the integrity of that faith. But you know, there were many Christianities, but most of them had some kind of weird Gnostic elements. So, or Judaizing elements. I think rather than go into chapter 13, we'll stop here. And we're going to be taking a break for a while. Next week, I'm going to be in...
Detroit?
No. Knoxville. Coming back from Knoxville. The week after that is Holy Week. The week after that, well, it's not a break. On Brett Tuesday, asking everybody to come to my house. We'll have a barbecue.
Yeah. Wow.
So everybody brings something to share, and you know, bring something to grill. We have the Grillmeister, Grillmeister over here, Brother Grillmeister.
Is that the 30th?
Pascha's on the 28th, so that'd be the 30th.
Yep. Then on the
21st.
Then on the 2nd, I fly to Hong Kong.
Oh.
And I'm gone. Then I'm gone on the 7th. I'll be in Hong Kong. I get back on the 9th. And then I'm here for a while. Most of May and June. Then I go to Australia around end of June, beginning of July. So, So let's see if we can coordinate, you know, at least by email or something, what people are going to bring, and maybe be in touch with the other members of the class who aren't here, so that we can kind of figure out some rides, figure out some.
Does everybody get Peter's email for the? If you want to give him your email address,
Yeah,
then.
sure, yeah, I'll do that.
You're writing to me. I didn't know. Nice to
Meet
meet
up
you.
the crowd.
You just kept throwing it away.
I was just, oh, okay.
I'll add you to the class list.
So I hope this was helpful and interesting.
Oh,
Very interesting.
You know, you can. I think I picked this up, the Book of Enoch, for like $2.99
Where?
was that?
on Amazon.
Amazon.
Really?
Yeah.
It kind of freaks me out, some of that stuff.
It's not
Well, it's very
it's not in
interesting.
the
Are there
Bible.
other pieces of the in the Ethiopian canon that are different than our canon?
I think this is I think Enoch is the major one.
So it's an SW. Yeah.
But you know, our canon is broader than the Roman canon by a couple, 2 or 3 books, and then I think the Ethiopian is the broadest canon. Right? It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and ever, to ages of ages.
Amen.